I'm Adam Lupel, IPI Vice President, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this high-level forum side event, The Culture of Sustaining Peace. It is great to see all of you here at the start of what promises to be a very busy September at IPI and around the UN. This standing room only energy in the room feels sort of like a launch of the season. Everyone is back from summer vacation, maybe a little bit tanned and ready to go. It's very, very exciting to have you all here. This is the second year that we've held a side event during the annual high-level forum on the culture of peace with the goal of exploring the connections among the culture of peace agenda, which stems from the UNESCO Program of Action of the 1990s, and the more recent Sustaining Peace agenda, stemming from the Advisory Group of Experts report and the concurrent GA and Security Council resolutions of 2016. I think we can all agree that sustaining peace has been one of the key themes of the 72nd session of the General Assembly and a key priority for this PGA. So it is only fitting that we gather here near the close of the session to explore the way forward through the culture of peace as a credible pathway for sustaining peace, as the high-level forum is titled. What are the cultural elements of an enduringly peaceful society? What can we learn from peaceful societies around the world, and how can we incorporate those lessons into our work here at the UN and beyond? IPI's work on this topic is thanks to the support and leadership of the Al-Babtain Cultural Foundation of Kuwait. And to Mr. Abdulaziz Saud Al-Babtain himself. Mr. Al-Babtain is an accomplished businessman, esteemed poet, and committed educator who has taken it upon himself to be a global advocate for the culture of peace, and for that we are eternally grateful. When the PGA addressed the high-level forum this morning, he called for a greater commitment to educate the young on the elements of peace. And this is precisely what the Babtain Foundation has set out to do. So allow me to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Babtain personally, and also thank his team at the foundation, in particular Dr. Tuhami Abduli. I look forward to working with you further on this agenda. Welcome to IPI and to New York. We will hear opening remarks from Mr. Babtain in a moment, but first allow me to introduce the moderator of this event, the Right Honorable Kevin Rudd, 26th Prime Minister of Australia and President of the Asia Society Policy Institute. As many of you know, Mr. Rudd has been a friend of IPI's for some time. He was the chair of the Independent Commission on Multilateralism, for which I had the pleasure of serving as part of the Secretariat. And I had the honor of working closely with him in that regard. But most recently, in June, Kevin was elected to be the director or the chair of IPI's board of directors. And I think this is your first public event in that role.
It's the first time you've let me out alone.
Yes. Yeah. And so with that, I would say it is with great pleasure that I introduce to you the chair of IPI's board of directors, Mr. Kevin Rudd. Kevin, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Adam, and welcome to the International Peace Institute, the IPI, as we call it here. Those of you from the United Nations family, from member states, or from UN organizations, I think you know that here in this institution you are among friends. We see ourselves as a helpful support to the work of the United Nations going back over many decades now. This institution has been running now for nearly 50 years, and it's been my privilege recently to have been asked to become its chair. And I bring to you the greetings of Terry A. Rod-Larsen, our president, who will be joining us again soon for the UN General Assembly season. This is an unusual subject, the culture of peace. For those of us who have been in the hard business of international politics, diplomacy, and from time to time conflict and war, when we speak of a culture of peace, it sets us back a little bit as to whether in fact such a thing is possible? Or if it is, in the world of practicality, is it faintly useful? It's often said that we dream in poetry and we govern in prose. I think one of the important contributions that we have to this panel today will be from one of the Arab world's leading poets who will express his own views and reflections on what that world of poetic imagination might have to say about the possibilities of transformational change. I am not an Arabist. I don't speak a word of Arabic. By training, I am a sinologist. I've done all my work on China, speak Mandarin and all the rest of it. The Chinese have a word for a way of thinking. It's called 思维. And 思维 basically means how you, in the deepest recesses of your mind, view reality, including the possibilities of whether that person there, that culture there, that community there, or that country over there wishes me good or ill. And it's our deep underlying 思维, to borrow the Chinese term, which I think radically shapes the world of international relations reality and political reality. Do we regard this person as a potential friend or foe? Do we see them as someone we should trust or, to begin with, distrust? If you like, these are axiomatic psychological considerations in the world of international relations and, frankly, of domestic political theory as well. When I look at the body of Chinese strategic literature on the question of peace and trust, most of it says, over many centuries, very simply, don't trust anybody. I can say this in full candour. But for those who think that Machiavelli is a unique product of the Western mind, let me tell you, there are Machiavellian thinkers across the entirety of humanity. Don't trust the other person. Don't trust the other state. It reminds me of a panel like this I was on a year or so ago in Washington with the recently retired head of Pacific Command of the United States Navy, whose opening line I thought was wonderful. He said, strategic trust is much overrated. Well, of course, his industry, his business is the reverse. But it's worth reflecting, again, on these deep questions of, let me put it in these terms, the psychology of politics and the psychology of international relations. Because psychology, the way in which we think about ourselves and others, radically affects our behaviour as individuals, as political parties, and as states, internally and externally. This is not just an idle reflection. If you look at those who study the neuroscience and the neuroscience of politics and, frankly, a new and emerging field in international relations as well, the way in which we use language, the way in which we form language, the way in which our thinking is shaped by our respective cultural experiences, either excites one part of our brain, which is given to flight and fight, or another part of our brain, which is given to hope and imagination. And therefore, these are not just idle, interesting questions that we're talking about here. They actually affect the behaviour of each of us and each of our governments each day. I'm old enough to remember that way back in the Mesolithic past, called the 1970s, that there was something which was fashionable in many universities, even through the 80s, and sometimes in the 90s, called peace studies. And I think what those folks were trying to get at, frankly, was something of the psychology, something of the society, something of the culture of what constitutes this concept of what we call peace and its constituent parts. I think there is time again for an appropriate reflection on what the neuroscience can contribute to this, as well as what those who are reflecting more deeply on cultural predispositions towards harmony and peace, as opposed to cultural predispositions towards conflict and war. None of us in this room, whatever state we come from, have clean hands on this question. We are all here to learn something new and afresh. And so I'm delighted to have such an extraordinary panel. We are going to have opening remarks from an extraordinary individual, as I said, the leading poet of the Arab world, and then followed by this great panel here, made up of the Deputy Permanent Representative of Bangladesh to my right, my good friend and colleague Karen Pearce, the PR for Her Britannic Majesty's Realm, the United Kingdom, and we also have Fabrizio Hochschild, who is the Assistant Secretary General for Strategic Coordination, the United Nations Executive Office of the Secretary General. But before we go to these eminently qualified speakers to participate in our panel discussion, and before we open it to you, the audience, to engage in a wider conversation, let me introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Abdulaziz Saud Al-Babtain. He worked in the Ministry of Education in Kuwait until 1962, and then resigned, went into business. He didn't publish his first volume of poetry until 1995, which suggests to me there's hope for us all, exiting bureaucracy, exiting business, and discovering some of the finer things of life and producing poetry. He currently serves as the chairman of the Abdulaziz Saud Al-Babtain Cultural Foundation. He's president of the scientific board of the foundation in the European Union, honorary president of the World Poetry Academy, and member of the Chancellor's Court of Benefactors of the University of Oxford. Mr. Al-Babtain established the Saud Al-Babtain Kuwait Scholarship for Postgraduate Studies in 1974, and the Foundation's Prize for Poetic Creativity in 1989. He has received 14 honorary doctorates from several Arab and foreign universities. I think I only have one, so well done to you. That one may be withdrawn any day. 14 honorary doctorates from several Arab and foreign universities for his efforts in the fields of Arabic literature, culture, and poetic creativity. Mr. Al-Babtain has also received numerous prestigious awards from right across the Arab world. And so, Dr. Al-Babtain, we welcome you to be with us in this important forum today, and to share your poetic reflections on the possibilities of creating a culture of peace. Over to you, sir.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. صاحب المعالي السيد كيفن رئيس وزراء استراليا الأسبق، رئيس مجلس أمناء المعهد الدولي للسلام، السيد ممثل الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة، السادة ممثلو الدول الأعضاء، والسادة السفراء ورؤساء البعثات الدبلوماسية، السيدات والسادة، أود في البداية أن أرحب بكم جميعا وأشكركم على مشاركتكم الفعالة وحضوركم في هذه الندوة التي يعقدها المعهد في شراكة مع مؤسسة عبد العزيز سعود البابطين الثقافية.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah. I'd like to welcome the Honorable Kevin Rudd, the former Prime Minister of Australia and the chair of the IPI Board of Directors. I would like also to welcome and thank the representative of the Secretary General of the UN, also representatives of member states, ambassadors, and heads of diplomatic missions. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to start by welcoming you all and thanking you for your active participation and attendance at this symposium held by the International Peace Institute in partnership with Abdulaziz Saud Al-Babtain Culture and Foundation.
كما أتقدم بجزيل الشكر إلى السيد تيري رود لارسون رئيس المعهد وفريق عمله الذين قاموا بتنظيم المنتدى السنوي رفيع المستوى لثقافة السلام.
I also would like to wish to extend my everlasting thanks to Mr. Terry Rod Larson, President of the Institute, as well as to his superb team for organizing the high-level forum for the culture of peace.
وإنه لمن دواعي السعادة الغامرة أن يشاركنا السيد ميروسلاف لاشاك رئيس الجمعية العامة للأمم المتحدة هذه الجلسة ويفتتحها، فله منا كل الشكر وخالص التقدير.
It is also a great pleasure to have the President of the General Assembly, Mr. Miroslav Lajcak, giving the opening address of this forum.
يعقد المنتدى هذه السنة حول موضوع يندرج في صلب اهتمامات مؤسستنا منذ سنوات، ألا وهو تعزيز ثقافة السلام ودعمها.
The forum for this year is discussing a theme that has been the basic core of the activities of our Foundation for Years, promoting and supporting the culture of peace.
وإني في هذا الخطاب سأعرض عليكم رؤيتنا للموضوع والتي نجسدها في أنشطة المؤسسة السنوية.
In my speech today, I'm focusing on our vision to this topic and how it's reflected in the Foundation annual activities.
تنبني رؤيتنا للسلام على قاعدة أساسية، هي أن السلام ضرورة حياتية.
We base our notion of the peace as peace is a life necessity.
فنحن اليوم في حاجة ملحة أكثر من أي وقت مضى إلى نقل السلام من الممكن إلى الضروري لأجل استمرار الإنسانية.
Nowadays, more than ever before, we realize the need to transform our perception of peace from the idea of possibility to a necessity for the survival of humanity.
علينا إذن أن نتجاوز فكرة السلام الممكن إلى فكرة السلام الضروري، فالضرورة تجعلنا نفكر في الواجب والمسؤولية الاجتماعية.
We should hold it necessary and not possible, because this will encourage us to think of the duty and social responsibility and to protect it.
نحن نرغب في الحياة التي ليس فيها صراع بل فيها تنافس، وحين يصبح السلام ضرورة وليس إمكانا سنؤسس العالم الأفضل.
We have to convince ourselves that peace is, of course, an obligation, not like an option. When we desire a world with competition and no conflicts, and when peace is perceived as necessity and not an option.
حين نفكر في تعميم السلام باعتباره ضرورة لتشمل كل العالم، فإن ذلك يعني أن نسخر سلوكنا ورموزنا وكل وسائل تواصلنا نحو الهدف الأسمى وهو السلام.
When we think of peace as a necessity and unite our efforts to spread it throughout the world, we will not just dedicate ourselves, but also our actions and resources towards achieving this ultimate goal, which achieving peace.
عالم السلام جوهرها التنوع، ليس فيه لغة أو لون أو ثقافة أو عرق أو طائفة أو دين، بل فيه لغات في لغة واحدة وألوان في لون واحد وثقافات في ثقافة واحدة وطوائف في طائفة واحدة. ببساطة هو عالم الإنسان المتعدد الأبعاد.
A world of peace is a sense of diversity, regardless of language, color, culture, race, class, or religion. It is a world where there is no language for all our language. Diversity is like a complementary relationship to the one global culture, embracing the characteristic of all cultures, and one universal religion where all religion melt. In brief, it is a multi-dimensional human world.
قاعدة أن السلام ضرورة تدعونا إلى إعداد مخطط عملي يمكن التعاون على تنفيذه. فالسلام في مخطط عملي يجب أن يكون ثقافة نكتسبها منذ الصغر عن طريق مناهج التربية والتعليم.
The notion that peace is a necessity invite us to prepare an action plan that can be implemented. Peace in a practical action plan must be a culture developed from childhood through educational curricula.
ثم نستوعبها لتتجسد في سلوكنا وحياتنا اليومية. ومن الواضح اليوم أن المحاولات قد تزايدت من الجهات الفاعلة دوليا للنظر في السلام والبحث في القضايا العالقة والمرتبطة بهذا السياق.
Which shall be absorbed by learners to be ultimately reflected in our behavior and daily lives. It is clear today that many attempts have been made by international actors to promote peace and examine unresolved cases related to this issue.
وفي الحقيقة رغم كل هذا الجهد لا بد من إعادة طرح الأسئلة أو بالأحرى إعادة ترتيبها على نحو ما هو مطروح علينا في هذا المنتدى. إن السؤال ما سبب الحرب وكيف يمكن تفاديها سؤال يأتي دائما بعد وقوع كارثة الحرب.
However, despite these efforts, it is necessary to ask ourselves rather than to reorder these facts according to what we have outlined at this forum. The question is, what causes war and how to avoid it? Usually comes after the fact that the disaster of war had already struck. It is a post-war question.
إن سؤال ما سبب الحرب وكيف يمكن تفاديها سؤال يأتي دائما بعد وقوع كارثة الحرب، أي سؤال لاحق بعدي وكأنما هو رد فعل على حدث وقع.
It is, as I said, it is a post-war question, one that is usually in reaction to a tragic conflict that has hit humanity and consequently inflicted serious destruction.
إنه ليس دليل تفكير في أدوات الحماية الاجتماعية لتجنب الحرب، والمطلوب أن نمنع إعلان الحرب في المجتمعات من الأساس، وعليه فإن الأسلم هو طرح السؤال الاستباقي ضمن المخطط الاستباقي.
This question does not communicate that social tools have been dedicated to prevent war. Therefore, the question should rather communicate a preemptive attempt to avert war and should be the following: how to build and maintain a peaceful societies.
كيف نبني مجتمعات سلم ونحافظ عليها؟ وللإجابة على هذا السؤال وتحقيق الغاية توجد سبل مثلى في رأينا هي بناء ثقافة السلام المستدامة في المجتمعات.
How to build and maintain peaceful societies? To answer this question and achieve our ultimate goal of protecting the peace, we think that developing the culture of peace within societies is the ideal solution.
فضمن الإطار العام لخطة التنمية المستدامة للعام 2030 والسلام المستدام من خلال قرارات الجمعية العامة للأمم المتحدة ومجلس الأمن في أبريل عام 2016 نقترح أن نعمل على تفعيل ثقافة السلام المستدامة. فإذا تم استيعاب ثقافة السلام في الوعي تحقق السلام بطبيعته، فهما مثل الشرط والمشروط.
Within the overall framework of the 2030 Sustainable Development Plan and Sustainable Peace outlined by the resolution of the UN General Assembly and the Security Council in April 2016, we propose the Culture of Sustainable Peace Plan. If the culture of peace is fully absorbed, peace will take place.
إن تطوير ثقافة السلام من أجل السلام يتطلب المشاركة على المستوى المحلي والإقليمي والدولي، أي تحقيق تعاون متعدد الأطراف والمستويات مع الدول الأعضاء والمنظمات الدولية على حد سواء.
To develop the culture of peace in order to make peace a reality requires participation from local, regional, as well as international actors. This is to say that there should be a strong multilateral cooperation between international organizations as well as member states. Our aim is in this project is to liaise with actors and to support effort seeking to achieve the culture of peace.
وهدفنا من هذا المشروع هو التعاون مع كل الأطراف الفاعلة ودعم الجهود الرامية إلى إلقاء المزيد من الضوء على ثقافة السلام والسعي إلى تحقيقها.
Our aim in this, of course, in this project is to cooperate with all of the actors and support all of their efforts seeking to achieve the culture of peace.
من جهة أخرى فإن إعداد مخطط هادف لدعم ثقافة السلام يجب أن يتضمن العناصر التالية، وهي تحديد مفهوم ثقافة السلام وتطوير الخيارات المعتمدة ومراجعة الأولويات وتقديم دراسات عن آليات تنفيذ ثقافة السلام وتحقيقها.
We should also clarify that the preparation of an action plan to support the culture of peace must include the following elements: defining the concept of the culture of peace, improving the methods adopted for this aim, reviewing priorities and encouraging studies on the mechanisms for the implementation and the achievement of the culture of peace.
السيدات والسادة، لأجل ذلك وضمن هذا الإطار تقوم حاليا 3 فرق من المختصين لتنفيذ المخطط العملي للمؤسسة بتدريس ثقافة السلام، وذلك بتحرير 17 منهجا في الغرض، وهي
Ladies and gentlemen, within this framework, 3 groups of specialists are currently working on the implementation of the Foundation's practical plan to teach the culture of peace by editing 17 manuals related to the issue. And those groups are.
وستقدم جميع هذه المناهج جاهزة مطبوعة إلى ضيوفنا الكرام في المنتدى العالمي لثقافة السلام الذي ستنظمه مؤسستنا في دورته الأولى في محكمة العدل الدولية في مدينة لاهاي بتاريخ 13 جون سنة 2019 السنة القادمة.
Primary and basic education experts group, secondary education experts group, higher education experts group. All the manuals will be presented as a hard copy to our guests at the World Forum for the Culture of Peace, which will be organized by the Foundation at the International Court of Justice in The Hague on 13 June 2019.
وسيكون ذلك بحضور بعض من الرؤساء الحاليين في العالم والفاعلين السياسيين والاجتماعيين والثقافيين.
This event will be attended by a member of world leaders as well as political, social and cultural actors.
وكلكم مدعوون لهذا الحفل يوم 13 جون سنة 2019، ومن يرغب يسجل اسمه وعنوانه لدى الدكتور تهامي العبدولي. ارفع ايدك دكتور.
And I am gladly inviting all of you who would like to attend this event on 13 of June 2019 to register his name and with Dr. Al-Tahami, and he raised his hand now.
ومما لا شك فيه فإن هذه المناهج هي لبنة تأسيسية ضرورية في مسار ثقافة السلام المستدام.
and and of course, like the manuals will be represent the cornerstone for the development of the culture of sustainable peace.
السيد رئيس المعهد الدولي للسلام، السادة الكرام، في الغالب نحن نصبح مسالمين بعد التعلم من الحرب، أي التعلم من القتل والدمار، ولكن المطلوب أن نكون مسالمين بطبيعتنا الثقافية وبوعينا الثقافي حتى لا نرتكب الحرب ولا نحدث القتل والدمار. إن ثقافة السلام سابقة تنغرس في الوعي البشري الذي يتحكم في فعل الإنسان وسلوكه.
President of the International Peace Institute, Mr. President of the General Assembly, usually we become peaceful after facing the consequences of war and learning the lesson from the killing and destruction which follow it. What we should do instead is to draw our peaceful nature and culture consciousness to avert war, killing, and destruction. The culture of peace is a primary feature like implanted in human consciousness and therefore controlling action and behavior.
هكذا نرى أن جوهر التفكير في السلام هو بناء مخطط عملي فيه تقديم للأولويات وإعادة ترتيب المسائل.
We therefore see the spreading of peace is made of a strategically designed practical plan in which we should prioritize and rearrange issues.
أنا متمثل لثقافة السلام العادل ومستوعب لها، إذا أنا موجود بالضرورة ككائن مسالم.
I am assimilating the culture of peace and therefore standing before you today as a peaceful individual who is living.
ولهذا السبب جئت لكم بأحفادي وهو الجيل الجديد ليتعلموا ثقافة السلام ويعلموها أيضا للآخرين، للأجيال التي ستلحق بهم.
And also I brought with me all my grandchildren just to show and demonstrate like how they are going to adopt also the culture of peace and how they are going to transfer it and also teach it to the later generations.
عاشت الإنسانية بسلام عادل ووفقنا الله جميعا، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
May humanity live in peace. God bless you and guide you all. Peace, mercy, and God bless you.
شكرا.
Thank you very much, Dr. Al-Babtain. If I could now ask our distinguished friend and colleague, the Permanent Representative of the UK, Karen Pearce, a very senior British diplomat, and worked extensively across Europe, Western, Central, Eastern, Middle East, Arab world, and most recently, I think, ambassador in Afghanistan. And so a person of great experience. And given Britain's role on the Security Council, thank you so much for taking the time out to be with us today. Thank you, Karen.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, friends and colleagues. Thank you for being with us. And to Mr. Al-Babtain, thank you very much for being here, sir, and also for all the work your foundation does in promoting this issue, and the fact that we've been able to hold this seminar consonant with the high-level event taking place in the General Assembly, I think is really important, and it's an honour to be here. On a personal level, having received medals for reciting poetry in my youth, which I think may even eclipse Kevin's experiences in the 1970s, I'm really pleased to see poetry come centre stage in something like this. And as you were speaking, I was trying to reflect on when the last Western major piece of poetry might have been that celebrated peace as a concept. And I thought it might be a long time ago, and it might be Virgil and the Bucolics, subject to correction by any classical scholars in the audience. But I also recall that when I was in Kabul, which, as the chairman said, is only a few years away, it's only 2 years since I was in Kabul, we would hold lots of poetry festivals at the embassy. and we would put the rags out, and lots of Afghan poets and ministers who were poets would come, and they'd read their poetry, and we would translate it in written form. And nearly every single poem was a political poem about peace. And I thought that just showed that people reflect very much their own experiences in their poetry. And it goes back to what the chairman was saying about peace studies. When you've lived by and large in an environment that is fundamentally peaceful, you forget how important bringing peace is to countries who, like Afghanistan, very sadly live with a very different experience. So thank you very much for drawing us to that point. I think 1968 may have been the only year since the end of the Second World War when British forces were not engaged on active duty in some conflict. And that's quite a sobering thought, that we have not actually had a prolonged period of peace taken on a global scale for quite a long time. I'm thinking of what Mr. Al-Babtain was saying about the disaster of war. I think my generation of diplomats, I think, was changed forever by the experiences of the Rwanda genocide, but also particularly of UNPROFOR and Srebrenica, where UN forces were on the ground. And I think the difficulty we saw there of impartiality, and what impartiality and neutrality prolonged to the greatest extent actually do. And they don't lead to peace, they lead to appeasement, and that's a very, very different thing. And so I welcome this emphasis on how we can actually embed a culture, because I think that's the most important part. It's not about appeasement, it's not about not doing the right thing. It's about how can we get to a stage where instincts for peace and for a peaceful reconciliation of disputes happens early enough in a process that it actually has a material effect on the outcome. And in the Security Council last week, when the Brits had the presidency, we did a debate on mediation, and the Archbishop of Canterbury came to speak. And borrowing a phrase from a football manager, the Archbishop spoke about getting reconciliation in early. And I think we still don't do enough collectively to really encourage parties in dispute to go for arbitration or reconciliation. And one very good reminder of this was today's Security Council debate on Nicaragua. The council wasn't split 50-50, but there were a sizable minority of members who thought the situation in Nicaragua was not a threat to international peace and security. But I would invite people to study more precisely the Charter of the United Nations in that respect, because the Charter says that a number of chapters come under the authority of the Security Council, and those chapters include the investigation of situations and disputes to see if they might become a threat to international peace and security. And I think the chairman also alluded to this. It's one of the biggest ironies in multilateralism that countries try very hard to stop the UN and other organizations getting involved in what they see as purely internal matters. But the more you don't stop a dispute upstream, the harder it will be to stop it downstream. And that's when you're most likely not only to get conflict, but also to get the intervention of international forces, which the Westphalian states on the Security Council profess to dislike even more. So there's an irony there that needs, I think, to be teased out. And speaking personally, I would really welcome the Security Council, possibly informally and privately, having some serious debates about where, in the modern times, when most conflicts are internal and not between states, that line between international and regional and internal could properly be drawn. I think when I first came here 10 years ago and the Peace Building Commission had just started, and I remember everybody thought it was a fantastic body that was going to do great things to bring the economic and security together. And I know from my experience in Kabul how important it is to bring those two things together, and I don't think we do it enough. But I think although the PBC has had some successes, particularly in dealing with individual countries, I think we collectively have been much less successful in drawing out templates and lessons and background information on which countries can draw as they try and chart their way through some of these difficult questions. And so I'd like to just suggest three key elements that might form building blocks for the international approach. I think the first is inclusivity. Strategies for sustained peace are most likely to be successful the more inclusive they are, whether it's youth or it's women's groups or it's civil society or it's the private sector, or it's making sure that all the warring parties have a place somewhere in the peace settlement. And I recall when I was in Kabul that we could never adequately answer the question of why in 2002 there hadn't been a consultation with the Taliban on the peace settlement, even though they were the vanquished party. And there's probably a very good reason for that. But with the benefit of hindsight, making space for groups at the table becomes very important. Accountable institutions, that would be my second point. They are at the core of the social contract between the state and its citizens. And if people don't have equal access under the law, don't have equal access to justice alongside work on good governance and anti-corruption, then these tensions are likely to grow and people are likely to feel disenfranchised in their own countries. And then lastly, of course, even more emphasis on human rights. And I don't exclude economic and social rights here. I know that's very important to some countries, and I want to say I agree with that. The Universal Declaration on Human Rights is 70 years old this year, and it spends at least as much of its time talking about economic and social rights as it does about political and cultural rights. And I think that's very important, and I would like to see more emphasis on bringing those two things together. I think there's some more things we can do. Paddy Ashdown, when he was running Bosnia for the international community, had three lessons. The first one was to do the rule of law first. The second one was to have a plan and stick to it. But the third was be prepared for it to take a long time. And I think the other problem we face is that we're very short-termism, and we don't put the effort in to starting some of these programs, particularly justice, right up front, and then running them in a sustained way. So I hope very much that the dialogue that's starting today will be able to confront some of those conundrums that have got in the way of having success in the past. And then I think the last thing is that all bits of the international system, not just the UN, really should pull together. I know there's been a joint UN World Bank Pathways for Peace report talking about using the whole set of tools. And I think that's very welcome. But I don't think we do enough to make those things a reality. If I want to talk economics in the Security Council, there'll be lots of people telling me I should go to ECOSOC, but there isn't an ECOSOC mechanism in the same way. So we divert a lot of our energies into process when we ought to be talking about substance. So I hope that one further product that might come out of today is to work out how we can operationalize that using the whole set of tools. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Excellency. Some really good points for us to focus on: inclusivity, accountability of institutions within states, and the renewed and stronger emphasis on human rights in all its dimensions. When Eleanor Roosevelt did the drafting in '48 of the Universal Declaration, based on Roosevelt's 4 freedoms, these were civil and political and economic and social wrapped into one. And frankly, I don't know if any of our declaratory statements about what we're on about in the international community have much improved since the Declaration, if we were to take it seriously. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for your 3 core points. If I could now ask the Deputy Permanent Representative from Bangladesh to add to our discussion.
Mr. Moderator, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I apologize on behalf of my permanent representative, Ambassador Masood bin Momen, who had to accompany our Honorable State Minister for Foreign Affairs for a previously unscheduled meeting. And he regrets his absence and seeks your kind understanding. We are indeed grateful to IPI for its initiative to organize this side event in collaboration with Al-Babtain Foundation. The title designated for this event has given an entire new dimension to the notion of a culture of peace. IPI can indeed claim credit for this innovative idea. Bangladesh takes pride in its contribution to introducing and building consensus around the notion of a culture of peace. Since the adoption of the resolution encompassing the Declaration and Program of Action on a Culture of Peace in 1999, we have indeed come a long way in the last 2 decades in terms of the universal relevance and acceptance of this notion. In the process, we are in debt to the successive presidents of the UN General Assembly, UNESCO, and partners in the academia and civil society for building a solid architecture around the notion of a culture of peace. The 8-point agenda inherent to a culture of peace provides it a useful premise and reference point and shows the potential for making it an all-embracing concept in its true sense. There is no reason why a culture of peace should be seen in isolation from the United Nations' seminal work across its 3 pillars of peace and security, sustainable development, and human rights. It is perhaps on this point of convergence that a culture of peace can complement the recently adopted notion of sustaining peace, and vice versa. In March 2018, as you may recall, Bangladesh partnered with Lithuania as the co-facilitator for a General Assembly resolution on peace building and sustaining peace. The Sustaining Peace agenda draws its life from the UN peace-building architecture and yet aims to foster a comprehensive approach to peace. It underscores the importance of considering peace in a continuum and as a factor of all its possible drivers or accelerators in a given context. It insists on recalibrating the United Nations' traditional approach of responding to post-conflict situations towards meaningful engagement from a conflict prevention to peace building on the premise of national ownership. As such, sustaining peace is not designed to be a mere theoretical construct for the passing phase at the United Nations as suspected by many. It is in fact aimed at making demonstrable changes on the ground that can perhaps even be monitored and measured, including through the cross-cutting targets and indicators built across the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, at not least within the SDG 16. The positive changes we witness in recent times in diverse contexts like Liberia, Gambia, and Colombia reinforces the potentials germane to the notion of sustaining peace. The PGA's high-level event on peace building and sustaining peace in April this year witnessed overwhelming support for such potentials and heard a recurrent call for further strengthening such potential in line with the forward-reeling recommendations contained in the UN Secretary General's report. We are grateful to the current President of the General Assembly for recognizing the promising interface between sustaining peace and a culture of peace and opting to project culture of peace as a credible pathway to sustaining peace for the high-level event he convened at the United Nations today. This does not imply that the two concepts be conflated with each other, which we believe would be self-defeating unless approached on the basis of informed understanding. There may be merit in exploring if the values and vehicles that help promote a culture of peace could be strategically deployed towards sustaining peace in a comprehensive manner. This could perhaps be the best practical manifestation of a culture of sustaining peace above and beyond the value-driven approach the notion of culture lends to sustaining peace. It would indeed be helpful for IPI and other interested partners to further explore this issue and suggest feasible pathways for operationalizing such an interface. In his opening statement at the high-level event this morning, the President of the General Assembly aptly noted that despite certain setbacks, there were already some notable trends discernible in the United Nations towards the direction of considering a culture of peace in relation to sustaining peace and vice versa. He stressed in particular that the notion of culture would not be meaningful unless efforts at sustaining peace gave emphasis on promoting the equal voice and participation of women, or it was duly inculcated in formative young minds. We would underline here that the mobilization of resources would remain key to the culture of sustaining peace, making a real difference on the ground thereby. This crucial aspect must be made part of our conversation and of all our efforts to translate our shared commitments into actual deliverables. In general, we consider this event to be the start of a potentially useful dialogue that can give further dimension and impetus to the established notion of a culture of peace. When Bangladesh had originally tabled the resolution on a culture of peace, we had a latent desire to see the concept gain a life of its own and embrace related useful notions and processes that would give sustenance to the dynamic process of a culture. We are encouraged to see a further opportunity opening in this direction. The real proof of our efforts would, however, take time. We must keep working till sustaining peace becomes an article of faith and a culture of peace is constructed in the minds of men and women around the globe, from Central Africa to Middle East, from the Far East to Sub-Saharan Africa. At the same time, we cannot but look into our own backyard. We must strive till the forcibly displaced Rohingyas camped in Bangladesh find a way to return to their homes in safety and dignity, living side by side with their neighbors as legitimate Myanmar citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for those reflections and the important addition they make to our discussion today, and thank you for the call to action on the part of the IPI as well. Fabrizio Hochschild from Chile, a serious UN professional who has served in the field in the Central African Republic and Colombia, and is now, of course, Assistant Secretary General in the Office of Strategic Coordination in the Office of the UN Secretary General. Fabrizio.
Thank you very much. At the outset, I'd like to congratulate IPI and the Al-Babtain Foundation for this initiative, because I think it reminds us that peace is ultimately a collective state of mind. And don't worry, as was pointed out, I'm a serious official. I'm not going to start arguing in favor of Buddhism or the legislation or the freedom to smoke marijuana. I mean this quite seriously, as I'll illustrate. I think too often in the aftermath of conflict, we think of peace building in terms of mediation, in terms of physical reconstruction of assets and infrastructure destroyed during the conflict, of governance and political mechanisms. And we don't think enough in terms of the intangibles of rebuilding peace, the culture of peace, without which conflict will inevitably return. And by that I mean the reconstruction of social cohesion, the reconstruction of trust between citizens, trust between the citizens and the state. There are multiple aspects to this, but I'd like to mention two. One is the rehumanization of the other. The first victim, casualty of conflict is the truth, and the first victim of conflict is the perception of the other, the enemy, as a human being. And until the other is re-recognized as a human being, the chances of truth really taking root are unlikely to result. And the second aspect is the reintroduction, and Ambassador Pierce alluded to this, of the rule of law. Conflict undermines the rule of law. Conflict gives rise to illicit economies. Illicit economies require conflict to survive, require the absence of rule of law to survive, and there are often heavy stakes, financial stakes involved in sustaining conflict because it's a very effective business model. And that once that takes root, it's very difficult to change. I'd like to illustrate this dehumanization aspect on the basis of some experience I had in Colombia. The UN, together with the Catholic Church and the National University, was privileged in Colombia to do what I think has never been done before, and that was to take 60 victims of the conflict from all sides, to Havana to speak directly with the negotiating parties, to share their experiences and to express their expectations of the negotiators. Among the victims that we took was a woman called Nelly Gonzalez, who was the mother of somebody called Alfonso Alexander. Now, she was a teacher and a trade union activist and poor. Her son was a policeman who was killed by the FARC on his day off in a public park. He was followed into a park and killed while he was playing with his young daughter. Another person, victim or survivor we took to Havana was a young woman called Emelise Hernandez Perdomo. Emelise Hernandez Perdomo was married to a member of the FARC. She was suspected of being a member of the FARC herself. The FARC were the depending who you talk to, the terrorists or the left-wing insurgents in Colombia. And she was detained by the Colombian military. At the time of detention, she was pregnant, heavily pregnant. She was beaten up in the process of detention. She spontaneously aborted the baby she was expecting, and the soldiers tossed the fetus before her eyes to dogs to eat. And she was later imprisoned for belonging to a terrorist organization. These are the people we took. Now, the truth is, if the FARC killed the son of a poor teacher who was also a trade union activist, and so theoretically very much on the same side of the political spectrum as them, it's because they did not see him as a father. They did not see him as a son. They did not see him as belonging to a family that fought for the poor. They saw him as wearing a uniform, as a symbol of what they saw as an oppressive state, a puppet state of imperialist forces, i.e. they totally dehumanized him. And they could only kill him because they dehumanized him. And likewise, if the soldiers beat up Emelise and destroyed her baby, it was because they did not see in her a mother. They did not see in her even a woman, a sister, a daughter. They saw her solely as a terrorist. And it's that perception of the other through a single lens, the single lens of terrorist, a term that's bandied about so easily today as a means of dehumanization and alienation, and through the single lens of representative of some sort of oppressive force, that allowed man to kill man, and usually it is men, that is at the essence of war. So if you want to really rebuild peace, you have to start by rehumanizing, by showing the other as human beings and beyond the simplifications and the reductions and dehumanizations that characterize the inevitable propaganda that goes with warfare and often precedes it, and too often succeeds it as well. And I think there are many ways of doing that. I mean, in Colombia, there were efforts to dignify victims, which was an effort of rehumanization. Personally, I think what inevitably has to happen is some form of reconciliation, some form of recognition at the highest level. No end of grassroots initiatives for reconciliation or dignification bear root where the leaders are chanting a different story. And we see that in the Middle East, where Palestine, Israel, where I've worked some time ago, there are many, many grassroots initiatives, but while leaders speak a different tune, it doesn't work. A handshake of Sadat and Begin, of Raúl Castro and President Obama, of de Klerk and Mandela, that is what really makes a difference. And likewise, where leaders speak in a very different tone, it also has a disproportionate knock-on effect. I think the situation is particularly difficult where conflicts, as was the case in Colombia, as is the case in Israel, have gone on for a very, very long time. I'll share a short anecdote with you from when I worked for UNRWA, an organization that desperately needs more support these days. I was there during the first Intifada, which was much less bloody than the current Intifada. And I intervened between some stone-throwing youths and the border police. It was in Shofat camp near Jerusalem, where the border police are responsible. And a border policeman was detaining an 8-year-old who was throwing stones. And I got in the way, and I said, "You have to release him. You can't detain an 8-year-old." And he turned to me and he said to me in perfect German, he was of Austrian descent, "You don't understand. He's a terrorist. They're all terrorists. They breed terrorists. They're terrorists." And in that manner, he dehumanized this child. The child whom he was using as a shield was hurt by the stones that were being thrown by the Palestinians towards the policeman. So he had to be put into an Israeli ambulance and taken to hospital. I went to see the parents of the child to tell them that the child was okay. He was now in an ambulance. He wouldn't be detained, but he was being taken to a hospital. And they said to me, the Palestinians, "You don't understand. The Israelis, they harvest organs. They will kill him in their hospital." So on both sides, there were these deep-seated prejudices, these deep-seated misrepresentations that nurture conflict, and that if you want peace, you have to overcome. But you won't overcome where leaders are singing a different tune. The other thing I'll talk about more briefly is this culture of the rule of law. I mean, I do think we often forget, and I saw this in Central African Republic, conflict is a major business. It's not just the result of political differences. We see this in Libya. We see this in many different conflict settings. It becomes a very lucrative business. The joke when I worked in former Yugoslavia is that the only place where inter-ethnic cooperation was really thriving at its best was in organized crime, where Albanians were selling weapons to Serbs, who were selling weapons to Bosnian Muslims, who were trafficking, etc. And crime has a very unifying effect, but it needs conflict or low-level conflict to survive. And it's very difficult to overcome. And that's the challenge now in Colombia in trying to do the demobilization, because there are still many other armed groups who are active, criminal networks, and they can offer much more to the demobilized members of the FARC in terms of lucrative income than can the state. So the recreation of a licit economy is extremely difficult, but extremely essential. But that too is not just a matter of creating income opportunities, it's a question of mindset changes and reintroducing a notion of the desirability of the legality and the feasibility of legality. Because in many conflict settings, that is completely eroded. And that was very clear after decades of conflict in Central African Republic, where the perception that one could actually earn an honest living is simply inconceivable. Corruption and crime are the only ways, apart from international organizations, of earning a living. So that is a mindset change that often needs to happen. And again, it's easier where conflict is short. I remember being very struck in Kosovo, where I went in with the Special Representative of the Secretary General at the time, Sergio Vieira de Mello, just after NATO forces took over. And this was after a very intense but very short war. There were no police, there were no services of public order. It was meant to be the UN, and we were about 10 people at that stage. And everybody was following the traffic lights. And I couldn't believe just how observant everybody was in the absence of any formal order to enforce it, of how people follow traffic lights. But that again shows that ultimately it's about mindset changes that take a lot of time to instill. And there I would very much agree with Ambassador Pierce of the need for persistence. I think too often we're in a world of instant gratification, we also seek instant solutions to conflicts that have gone on for decades. And I think we need, as the UN, to have much more staying power and also to invest much more in terms of these intangibles that I think are well summarized in the theme of the culture of peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fabrizio, and particularly for reminding us of the first victims of conflict, the first being truth and the second being the dehumanization of the other. And therefore, on the dehumanization question, what in practical terms can be done to rehumanize in the awful reality of rolling conflict? And within that, the central role of reconciliation and dignification, the term that you used before. Friends, we have about a quarter of an hour left for some dialogue with those in the room. If you have an observation you wish to make or a contribution to the discussion, please put up your hand. If it goes on for more than about 60 seconds, I will be ruthless from the chair and cut you off because we want to get around as many people as possible. To my right, and please self-identify.
Yeah, hi, I'm Dr. Danieli. Through the years, I've worked in all the places mentioned and represented at the UN both the World Federation for Mental Health, the International Society for Traumatic Stress Studies, and currently the International Organization of Victims Assistance. And I'm very heartened at the mention of victim, at the mention of dignification. What I've missed is a mention of victims' rights, which we absolutely must underscore when we speak about justice. Somehow when we talk about the rule of law and we don't insist on victims' rights, they tend to not be redressed or addressed. And a particular mention of healing, because when you talk about rehumanization, so to speak, you're really talking about healing not only the physical wounds, but the mental health wounds, and really also the soul wounds of both victims and perpetrators. And I think a mention of religious leaders should be included as well. And this is very exciting. And the notion of education for children is absolutely necessary. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What I'm going to do is take a series, and then I'm going to arbitrarily allocate it to members of the panel to come back to you on the points that you raise. A young woman up the back. Behind you.
Hello, I'm Eleanor Bennett with the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. I was wondering in what ways can we combine the desire for justice with our peace processes? So combining that with reconciliation, what mechanisms can we use?
Thank you very much, Eleanor. Another question. I think there was a young woman here as well. Yeah. Thank you. And I'll work my way to the front. Yeah.
Hi, Kevin. We have a number of questions coming in on Facebook, so I'll give you one now, and perhaps in a future round we can come back. The first question is from Zainab Nuhu, and she wants to know, looking at women in post-conflict transformation, what are the things put in place to ensure and encourage participation in sustaining peace?
Okay, thank you very much. Lady up the front, and then the gentleman here. This lady here. We have a mic for you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all of the panel for their interesting questions. Particularly, I would like...
Introduce yourself, please. Reintroduce yourself.
Oh, I'm Leslie Wilkinson. I was a senior political officer at the UN. I was also involved in peacekeeping in various parts, as well as other things. And I'd like to thank everyone for their comments and suggestions. I'm very interested to know, how do you deal with a conflict situation where you have external actors? It's not just the two who are fighting or the three. There are often external actors who are pushing one group or the other, and I'd be grateful for your comments on that. Thank you.
Good. I might take one more, and then I'll flip it to the panel. The gentleman here, thank you. That's him. Yeah, you got...
My name is Ram Chaluri from the International Committee for Peace Coalition in Princeton, New Jersey. In the current era of extremely strained relations based on race, religion, and culture all over the world, especially in the US now, while the politicians are taking advantage of the situation, openly or otherwise, how would you build peace culture?
Okay, good. Now let me try and do an arbitrary division of labour. Fabrizio, are you okay with victims' rights, the initial question? The second one we had was the role of justice in the peace process. I might throw that in your direction as well, Fabrizio. Is that okay? Karen, are you okay with the role of women in post-conflict situations? That was the one which came from our online participant. We also have the further question about the complexity arising from external actors, if I could throw that in your direction as well, Karen. And on the question, the last question which was just asked, which is the actual physical process given the race, religious and cultural dimensions to peace, how do you go about building a peace culture? If I could throw that to my colleague from Bangladesh. Is that okay? Good. Over to you, Fabrizio.
Thank you. No, I think what you said about victims' rights and mental health is absolutely critical. And in fact, I just came from a meeting of the Secretary General with his senior managers where the issue of mental health was high on the agenda. And it's very much his perception that this is the orphan or the neglected child of the international movement for access to health. And especially in post-conflict situations, much more needs to be done. And he's very convinced of that and trying to rally the system to do much more to address those. And understanding that that's not an act of charity, but indeed a right, a fundamental human right, and a prerequisite for lasting peace and for solid development. On the question of the relationship between justice and peace, I mean, of course, promoting justice is often seen as somehow in tension with promoting peace. And often, I think in the short term, there are such tensions. But in the long term, I think the lessons we've learned is that peace processes that are pursued without an element of accountability, without an element of justice, are unlikely to be durable and certainly don't honor the aspirations of the victims. Having said that, I do think what's becoming increasingly clear is that we need a much more sophisticated concept of justice than just thinking of justice in terms of throwing people in prison for a very long time. I think Paulo de Greef, who was a special rapporteur and a distinguished Colombian jurist, did a lot of work on this under the banner of transitional justice, where he made clear that in a post-conflict or transitional setting, one has to understand the pursuit of justice as being made up of 4 pillars. First of all, non-repetition of crimes. Securing non-repetition, which is essentially what peace does, is the cornerstone of transitional justice. Secondly, having a truth process. And I think truth processes is a way of honoring victims' rights and a way of dignifying victims. Thirdly, reparations for victims. And a fourth component is, of course, prosecutorial justice for the most serious crimes. The Colombians came up with a very sophisticated model which integrated all those 4 elements. And moreover, basically, within those 4 elements, engineered a sort of trade-off. So the more you contributed to non-repetition, the more you contributed to reparations, the more you contributed to the truth process, the more you could be subject to leniency when it came to prosecutorial justice. So I think there are very solid and sophisticated ways of reconciling peace with justice processes. And I would argue that the peace agreement that came out of Colombia was a model in that regard.
And by the way, on the way through, thank you, Fabrizio, and your other UN colleagues for the extraordinary work done in Colombia over many years. Karen.
Thank you very much. Women in post-conflict situations. I think predominantly for me, that's about systems. It's about making sure that whether the UN is helping to run a country or whether the country has its own leadership, you need the systems in place to make sure that the right sort of groups, predominantly women, are consulted. You need the systems in place back in New York and in the Human Rights Council, but also in the public policy UN agencies in Geneva to make sure that women's groups are consulted. You need not to treat people as monolithic, however. In the early days when we thought there could be a Syria peace process, so 2011, 2012, there was a big irony that if we were not careful, some women would see a more liberated future, even with President Assad still in power, and worried about going into a system, the outcome of which might have been a more repressive society for them to go about their business in. So there's something really important about being comprehensive in this consultation. But I think whether it's a regional organization or whether it's the UN, right from the top, as the Secretary General is doing, the message needs to go out that this is a critical part of peace building, because I have seen even UN representatives just refuse to bring women into various processes. And then it's incumbent on member states, obviously, to support that. I think the external actors one is a lot harder, but there are things that can be done. I was reading an account of the crisis in Goma in the last few years. We, as the UK, made our aid to Rwanda conditional on not supporting the M23 rebels and supporting a peace process. And I think we get rather squeamish sometimes about doing things like that, but I think it can be an essential part of trying to get the right people to the table and keep them there in peaceful conditions. I think there's again another role for multilateralism in dealing with external actors in terms of sustaining the right sort of behaviours and values. And ultimately there is the question of sanctions if those external actors continue to disrupt the peace process. And the UN Security Council has lots of examples of that.
Thank you. Tariq.
Yeah, how to build the culture of peace. So one has to understand why we call the notion a culture of peace, because we feel that culture is an inextricable part of human life. So it's the centrality of peace that we should make a part of our life. It should start from the family to begin with. I mean, with a formative young mind, as I have mentioned in my intervention, and then it should go to the family. It should proliferate to the state, to the regional, international, and at the global level. So we have to make peace a part of our lifestyle, and if we are able to do that, then I think that every other thing will fall in place. That we have to believe in peace. We have to idolize it, and there are a number of practical steps which we can follow to inculcate the culture of peace at individual, societal, state, and international level. These could be finding the not to be reactive, rather to look into the root causes of violent conflict, why it's happening, how we can address it, what are the missed opportunity. And peace has to be looked into a continuum. It's not only in post-conflict situation or during situation or in pre-conflict situation. It has to be in continuum in all the phases of a conflict, beginning from the beginning of the conflict. It has to be pursued with equal intensity and vigor all the time. I think that is the way we can attain, if not a culture of peace, but at least a semblance of a culture of peace.
Thank you so much. Now, we have less than 5 minutes. I'm going to take 2 or 3 more very short, sharp questions, and then we're going to close it up. Anyone got a bursting question? Gentleman up the back. Yes, sir.
Matthew Lee, Inner City Press. It's a question for Ambassador Pierce. Just a specific question. How would you apply this culture of peace, for example, to the situation in Cameroon and the Anglophone areas where there's a long-standing dispute about language and history? And I know you were president of the council and a meeting wasn't held. What made a meeting on Nicaragua more meaningful in terms of refugees than say, on Cameroon and what's happening there? For Mr. Hochschild, very fast.
Okay, no, that's one, sir. You get one. Okay. Other questions from up the front here? One over here. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. This comes from Muhammad Ali on Facebook. How do we measure the role of higher education institutions in sustaining peace?
Very much. Any final question? Sorry, the lady in the middle here. Yep, there. That's right. This lady with her hand up. That's right. That's you.
Hello, Pamela from World Youth Alliance. I have one question. What are the consequences that the UN has put in place for this human rights violation? For example, the example have been given towards the dehumanization of that lady from Colombia. What is the UN doing as a consequence to those soldiers? Thank you.
Let's conclude it there. So, Karen, if you could take the first, Fabrizio the third, and if you could take...
I think if you're going to apply it to the situation in Cameroon, the Anglophone situation, the key thing is that the dialogue continues, the military don't act disproportionately, and those of us who consider ourselves Cameroon's friends help the Cameroonian government develop and stick to a plan for dealing with the vast numbers of the Anglophone communities who are not violent. And that's the path we've been taking. Not everything comes to the Security Council, even when it's important. There's no preordained hierarchy. You're much more likely to end up on the Security Council's agenda if no positive steps are being taken. and any member of the Security Council can raise an issue at any time. So, as I say, there's no preordained hierarchy. Nicaragua is not more important than Cameroon. The situation of human rights globally is important, and we deal with those issues in the best way we deem right for the particular situation at the particular time we deal with it.
Yeah, Tariq.
Thank you. It's not only higher education. I mean, education at any stage has an important bearing on inculcating a culture of peace, leading to sustaining peace. It's all about shaping the young mind, and that is where education, and for that matter, higher education comes into play. And when it's about sustaining peace, that it has been referred to, this is being a relatively new term, a new concept. I think higher education can be an important tool in better understanding the relatively new notion of sustaining peace. It's basically about prevention and continuum of pursuing peace over the different stages of conflict. So as higher education has an important role to play, and for that matter, education at any other stage. And I think we need to build upon developing our education system in that direction. Thank you.
Fabrizio, to close.
Thank you. What the UN is able to do for victims will vary enormously depending on the nature of our presence in the country or conflict concerned. And obviously, where we have a larger presence that is given the space by the authorities concerned, we can do more. In the case of Colombia, we had an Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights that took up legal cases where there was abuse of individuals. We also had UNHCR, UNICEF, and other organizations that did their utmost to provide both assistance and, in some cases, psychological aid. In Colombia, there were over 8 million registered victims. So both the state's ability and our own ability to cover the needs was always sadly inadequate. But within those means, many brave colleagues, risked their own welfare to work hard for victims, as so many colleagues do elsewhere in the world.
Thank you very much. UNESCO's statement in its constitution says, since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defences of peace must be constructed, leaving aside the gender inequality of the statement, but tempered by the fact that most wars have been started by men. It's important to understand that we are dealing with challenges which are both attitudinal and institutional. And that's been the focus of the discussion so much here today. And I'd thank so much the panel and our guest speaker for bringing emphasis to bear on that. On the institutional questions, I thought the reflections from across the panel on reconciliation, on dignification, on restitution, on mediation, on arbitration, Karen's point, also on active prevention, and then the much difficult and complex area of humanitarian intervention. But that, in fact, is the spectrum. If you get the early bits wrong, you're going to end up with the latter bits, whether you like it or not. And my final reflection is an entirely personal one. These are about questions of peace and of justice and our own relationship with Indigenous Australians. When you've spoken before about the 4 pillars of justice as non-repetition, of truth, of reparation, and of prosecutorial justice, and I've reflected on that as we've sought to apply it in our own country. Our history on this question was appalling, but non-repetition for us was key, a truth exercise whereby we collected the stories of Indigenous people over decades and decades and told those stories through the National Parliament finally, affected the way in which the nation dignified our first inhabitants in a way which hadn't happened before. And reparation occurred through a national program of closing the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. An imperfect process, But I reflected on that, Fabrizio, as you reminded us all of the core pillars of justice and peace. Thank you so much for your active participation. Put your hands together for this extraordinary panel.